All right, it looks like the timer is down. I cannot delay this any longer. Let me first start by introducing myself. My name is Aaron Magnan. I obviously work at Autodesk. I use Fusion 360 day in and day out. You might know me from some of the other videos that I work on, things like quick tips and things like the What's New videos. Those are the only times you would have otherwise seen my face. We are new to this live stream thing. Bryce did one last week. If you didn't see it, there's a recording of it. You can take a look at it. This is my first this week, so take it easy on me. I spent a lot of time trying to learn all the technology that we have to use to actually run these things, and I hope that I didn't neglect to actually put together great Fusion content to show you. So I guess without further ado, let's actually get into Fusion, and I'll show you a little bit about what we're going to be doing today. So real quick, I'm just going to switch over to my screen. Looks like it actually worked, so that's always good. What I'm actually going to be doing today is I'm going to be working with an imported assembly, and I'm going to reassemble it, and I might make a part change. I might make some design changes, and I want to capture all the appropriate motion with what I'm doing here. So we can go ahead and take a look at one of the completed versions of this. I have two different versions here. I wanted to highlight some things that we've found out about, some options that you use when you're creating these things, when you're creating those assemblies. I'll open this guy up, and actually, you know what? I already made a mistake. I didn't want to open up that version. I had started working on some simulation stuff for a potential future live stream, but instead, I actually wanted to open up the version here in my data panel. Here you can actually see the full design history that I went through. And what I wanted to show you here was how long it took me to go from that imported SOLIDWORKS assembly to a finished model in terms of capturing the correct mechanics of this system. So you can see that the time here was actually like 7 minutes, and that wasn't me trying to rush. That was just me working through it and, preparing essentially for what you're going to be seeing today. And, it goes from having basically zero joints to having captured basically the full mechanics of this system that we're after. So I'm going to take you through this process of what I went through. Like I say, time dependent. I'll try to get into some other things here as well. Potentially, redesign one of the parts, make a new end effector, to grasp some different types of objects. And I actually pulled this model down from GrabCAD. Take a look at some of the models over there. You can practice with things like this, and definitely take a look at the Fusion 360 gallery. There's tons of great content on there. Actually, a lot of the stuff that we use to do the What's New, we actually pull right from there, and we thank everyone for their contributions to that. So let's actually go through this process, right? So let me start by uploading this assembly. So I'm just going to click upload and select to find those files. It pops right into the right folder. Look at that. I always like that, right? We'll go ahead and just select all the parts as well as the assembly that tells us how it goes together. And you can see that it actually pulled this all in here. It's got some very generic names. And also I accidentally grabbed this gripper snapshot that someone might have included with this. And I'm going to go ahead and just remove that. I don't want to add any unnecessary data. If you had multiple assemblies, SOLIDWORKS assemblies here, you'd actually have the ability to toggle whichever one was the master assembly. So keep your eyes out for any of those options that you might see there. I'm going to go ahead and click upload, and in a very short time frame, this is going to be available for me to work on. And it's popped open on another screen that I have where I'm watching myself and trying to monitor any questions. Actually, Bryce is online to answer any of the questions that you might be posing. I'm trying to not be too distracted by all that stuff. So, as time goes on, we'll get better at this and we'll be able to be more interactive. But there we go. It looks like it has finished uploading. So let's see what you go through to actually, make the mechanics behind something like this. So I'm going to open up this assembly that I had just imported here. And right away, it looks a little bit different. Things like the history are missing from the bottom, and if I try to do things like click and drag, it is actually allowing me to do this. That's not really the typical behavior that you see when you're working with a history-free model. The reason why it's doing this, or allowing me to actually do component drag, is I have this option toggled here in my selection tools over here. So if I clear that, this is kind of the default behavior. If you've imported a model, the history's gone, and you won't be able to click and drag things like I'm demonstrating here. I'm gonna do a quick undo, because if you've ever designed or assembled something in Fusion 360, you know just how amazing the as-built joints are, and this is going to come in very handy for me as I go to actually create the mechanics of this system. But at this point, I do want to close my data panel. Let's kind of focus on the assembly that we're looking at here. And let's do a couple things here to get it ready so I can actually start assembling this thing. So the first thing that I'll do is I'll bring my mouse cursor to the top level name in the browser that you see on the left hand side of my screen. I'm going to just right click on that, and I'm going to select to capture that design history. This is going to enable me to do all this assemble work that I'm going to be actually showing you today. So once I do that, you will get that more familiar history on the bottom of the screen there. You can see, I mean, there's not actually a lot of history there. Bryce had a really cool quick tip that talked about how you can use some of these edit some of these features down here as a part of a McMaster quick tip. I recommend you take a look at that if you get a chance. But I do have, a history bar with not a lot of history in it, and that's the case. I mean, if you're importing parts and assemblies from different CAD systems, it's not going to include that history, unfortunately. So that's something that we're just going to have to deal with, and it's something that we'll deal with quite rapidly. You'll see here. So let's go ahead and let's start to design this. And I do have a SOLIDWORKS background, and the first thing that you do in something like this, if you were designing in SOLIDWORKS or assembling something in SOLIDWORKS, is you'd fix one component, right? You'd want to tie down some sort of base component just to build the rest off of. And this is actually something that I think people try to do in Fusion 360, and they use this ground option to try to do it. I'm going to recommend that you do not use ground for the purpose that it kind of sounds like. Instead, we're going to actually do a joint to tie this to this assembly workspace. And essentially what we're doing is we're going to tie this, we're basically going to fix the part down that we're going to add this joint to. So like I say, I do have a way that I can demonstrate kind of the problems that this ground option can cause you. I'm not certain if I want to go down that avenue at this very moment. Maybe I'll come back and revisit that a little bit later. But if you do have this inclination to want to go and ground this thing right away, don't do it. Let's instead use an assemble feature, a joint, to do it instead. So let's jump into my assemble tab, and you can see I'm using the new UI. I think Bryce showed you how to turn it on. It's available in your preferences under previews. I'm getting used to it. I'm liking it a lot. There are some things that are actually missing. I mean, it is still a preview, so don't expect it to have all the exact functionality that you're looking to use right off the bat. So something that just to be aware of. Anyway, let's go ahead and create this joint. And I changed my tab to my assemble tab, but I'm not really going to be using that. I'm going to use a lot of keyboard shortcuts here because I absolutely love them. So Shift J is going to do my as-built joint. So I'm going to just hit Shift and J on my keyboard, and this is going to bring up my as-built joint dialog over there on the right-hand side. So like I say, instead of grounding this component, I'm going to actually select to create an as-built joint between it and the top-level assembly. And that's going to force that to be rigid. It's going to force it to not move around in context to this assembly anymore. So that's one. Let's kind of pick up the pace here a little bit. I have a lot of additional explanation going on that I wasn't doing when I built it in 7 minutes, right? So let's continue this. Maybe I'll create another rigid group between, or rigid as-built joint between this component and this component. And if I rotate it around, you can start to see this is actually kind of comprised of multiple components that are kind of bolted together, tied together with pins and things. So So I actually, one way that we can avoid having to create tons and tons of joints here is I could use those rigid groups that I accidentally mentioned before. So I'm going to actually grab this one from my my toolbar at the top here. I'm going to select rigid groups, and I can just go through and I can start to select all these different components that have these. You can see that I selected the two that already have a joint created between them, and that's okay. I'll just click yes to accept that and just continue to select additional components here. And one thing that I'll actually do while I'm in this as well is I'll actually create rigid groups between the pins. I'm not actually going to be adding the revolve motions about with the pins. Really they just need to be very stationary in this sense. So I'm going to select the 4 pins, the two plates, and as well as the 2 mounting pieces there, and that's going to actually kind of create a real hard rigid group there. If I click and drag, nothing's going to move because of that as-built joint tying that down. If I click and drag some of these other components, you can see I'm still missing some of these joints at this moment. So again, let's go back to revert the position back to where it was, because like I say, these as-built joints are really going to help us quite a lot in getting this thing built very quickly. So at this point, I could create another group, 2 rigid groups essentially, between the gripper on the left and the grippers on the right, as well as the pins that are there as well. Like I say, I'm going to create a lot of the actual as-built joints between the linkages and the arms. So let's actually go ahead and do that. I'll select my rigid group. I'll select the 2 plates that make up the left gripper as well as the pins. And I like to use my redo command quite a lot. If you right click and hold, you can see all these different commands presented to me. What this means is that if I actually move my mouse up, I can repeat that rigid group once again. I just pass right through it, and there we go. We'll just repeat that rigid group once again and select the components on the right hand side of this. And it looks like I accidentally grabbed something there, and then no big deal. We can just reselect it again to clear that last selection that I had accidentally got. Okay, so there we go. Let's kind of see what we've done there. What I'd recommend is, as you're going through and building these things, do just like I'm doing. Just kind of slide things around, see what's happening, see if it's capturing the right sort of grouping that you're after, right? So let's go ahead and revert this back again, and then we'll continue to create some additional joints here. So let's do a Shift J once again. And in this case, I want to start to actually create the rotation for this model. We'll change this type right away. You can see all the different types of joints you have access to. Revolute is what I'm going to be using here, but and most of the names are pretty clear at explaining what each and every one of them does. So if you have concerns or if you have questions of what they might do, what I'd recommend again is just try it out. Here I'll select Revolute, and I'll select this component and actually this component, and then it's looking for position, right? So it needs to actually know where it needs to rotate about. I'll zoom in here, and using the pin for this is totally fine. That center of that pin is exactly where I want that to rotate about. Like I said, if you're not certain what some of these as-built joints do or what some of the joints do, just try them out. You can always animate them to visualize whether or not you're capturing the right sort of movements here. So obviously Y is not going to work, Z is what I'm after, X is not the correct rotation. So again, don't be afraid to try these things out and make some mistakes. It's fine. You can always undo. With that said, I do definitely like people to realize that our undo will present the full history of what I've been doing up to this point in this design. So at any time I can go back to a much earlier time in this. I can always go and redo it as well. It's something that I was actually just doing in another design that I was working on. I'd accidentally deleted a part out, so I rolled it back. I actually saved out the part that I had accidentally deleted and then reinserted it later. Kind of a funny workaround, but I made a little bit of a mistake that I probably shouldn't admit to you guys. So here we go. You can see now we got that correct rotation. Again, once I'm done, I can hit Control Z to revert back to that original location. or I can use the revert button that pops up whenever you've moved a component inside of assembly like this. Let's go ahead and do some more as-built joints. So Shift J, let's kind of pick up the pace a little bit here. We'll select these two guys and this. The reason I'm going to pick up the pace here is because there's quite a lot of these joints that I'll actually be creating here. So this next group will be between something is not letting me select right now. That's unfortunate. They are all joints, right? Or they all are all components. Make sure I don't have any selection filters on. Yes, for some odd reason it was having a little bit of difficulty letting me select that component for some odd reason. Anyway, we're back in business. Let's go ahead and just continue on. In this case, we'll add another revolute there, repeat our as-built, and continue along a little bit further here. So, we're getting a little bit closer. We're obviously missing some more of these joints, so just continue on. Click and check. That's kind of my mantra that I adhere to. Oh, not the correct part once again. So let's go back to the linkage and maybe the pin and define some more of this rotation. So we're getting closer. We're getting closer every second here. We just need to kind of continue with these as-built joints all over the place. At some point or another, you might start to be annoyed with kind of all their joint handles showing up. That's what these little flags are representing. And different joints have different handles that you can see. If you ever do get annoyed by seeing those, you can always turn the whole group off using the hide show button from the browser there. There's also some filters available to you in some of your display settings down here as well. It'll enable you to select things and visualize different components depending on what you're trying to do. Okay, let's add some more of these as-built joints between these linkages, and looks like we're pretty much done with the front end here. The back end, I could continue to do some more of these joints, but I could also do things just like create these rigid groups between these guys. I mean, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do that as well. So there we go. That looks all right. Let's continue a little bit further. And just like that, I think we have now fully created all the joints with this guy. And again, just double check. He looks like I did definitely forget that one, but that's something that I'll get to in a second here. So let's go ahead and not repeat my rigid group. In this case, I do want to do an as-built joint, so I'll Shift J to get to that keyboard shortcut. I'll select the gear as well as the where it's mounted to, and then set that revolute about that center point. And if you ever have some rotation that looks like that, you might have selected something wrong. You might have selected the wrong position. Just go ahead and try it again and see if you can correct it. There are some nice options that you have when you're actually going to select the position. Things like holding command will keep all these different points available, even if you scroll way off over to the side. Nice little. That's a nice way to be able to find the center of something that maybe doesn't exist. Maybe I want to select the center of this, but I'm having difficulty selecting it. Holding command after I've highlighted that model edge will enable me to select that a little bit easier potentially. Okay, so I think that is looking pretty good. Obviously, we want these to move together, and we don't want these gears to mesh through one another. So how are we actually going to capture that? In this case, we're going to capture that with some motion links. So this is the next option you see on here, motion link. Of course, you can always use your S key shortcut and start to search for that motion link option. One thing that was brought to my attention with this new UI that I hadn't realized, and this person had brought up a great point in a comment in a YouTube video, is that these design shortcuts, because everything has been grouped in tabs, are all kind of mashed together now. So if you wanted a sheet metal shortcut in this list, or if you wanted all your assemble shortcuts in this list, they're all going to kind of be grouped together with this new UI. That's because this S key design shortcuts is actually tied to workspaces. So you can see if I scroll to like a simulation workspace and then I hit S, it would show me completely different shortcuts. But in this case, the way that it's been set up, you can see that there's now this grouping between them. So something to be aware of if you're going to be using this new UI. I presented this info to someone who's actually working on the new UI over here at Autodesk, one of these people that are much smarter than me, these developers. And I brought it up. I don't think they have a solution in mind just yet, but we are aware, and that's something that hopefully we get some more options presented to us a little bit later, because we don't want that to get overly jumbled. Anyway, where I was going before I went down that whole discussion, I was going to do a motion link. So let's go ahead and find it again, and let's select it from the shortcut. And in this case, to create these motion links, you want to just select, two different joints. So it's a good thing I kept my joints visible. Of course, you can always turn them on or off while you're in these commands as well. So I'll select these two guys, and that nice animation is demonstrating there's something very, very wrong with the way that I have set it up right now. I really didn't input anything, so it's not really my fault. I'm gonna blame Fusion for this, but instead of obviously rotating together, you want these to kind of rotate opposite to one another. So we'll make this second Revolute 6 angle negative 360 versus positive 360, and this could be 1 and negative 1. It doesn't really matter. It's just it's a rotation, so tying that together with 360 kind of makes sense. Okay, so we'll click OK. We could also turn off the animate at any time, but I do find it extremely handy in visualizing what's going on there, and it's nice to see what actually will happen as it goes through these motions. So if we go and we click and drag this, and there we go, it's looking pretty good. The one thing that is still missing is this guy's not turning anything. This is actually kind of what is supposed to be driving this, I believe. So we'll go ahead and create another motion link. And the way it stands right now, there's obviously some interference there. Definitely don't want to start it like that. If we go and we revert it, you'll see there's even the way that this was designed in the previous CAD software, it still has some interferences there. It's something we probably could overcome with just creating maybe like doing like a move command. Maybe we could just rotate this a little bit to try to compensate for any of that collision that was happening at the beginning. That will enable me to avoid that collision and then create that motion link and hopefully capture this in a little more detail than previously. I do see some fit issues with this, but I'm not gonna focus on that too much. But let's go ahead and just do that motion link once again. If I hit S on my keyboard and go to start typing in motion link, I'll be able to find that very quickly. I do want to capture this position in this case. I usually would just say continue and it would revert, but in this case I do want to capture this position because I had obviously moved that for real purpose. I wanted to avoid the collision that it had started in. So there we go. If we capture that new position, it does create a capture position key basically in our history. And then we'll go and select these motion links, and again we'll select the two joints that tie these together. And that looks all right. Obviously these gears are much different sizes, so you probably don't really want them to be rotating one for one. I didn't actually go through and measure or count teeth to determine what the ratio should be here, so I'm going to just kind of eyeball this. Maybe we'll go like I say, it could just literally be 2 to 1 or something like that. It doesn't have to be 360. It's just, we're making some ratio here, and it looks like I think I did it backwards. So again, if we go 1 to 2, maybe it'll look a little bit better. Okay, there we go. It's starting to look a little bit better, but 1 to 2 isn't quite what we're looking for. Maybe 1.1, and this, like I say, this in this case, I'm not like overly concerned with having this be perfect. If I wanted to, I could go and I can measure these and get real close, but that's looking all right. I'm going to go ahead and run with it. Okay, click OK. There we go. Now we have captured a lot of this motion, and we've done a pretty fine job of creating this assembly. One thing that I had actually intended to mention at the beginning of this live stream was when you bring these components in, it does a really good job of actually combining multiple parts. And it's hard to tell right now just because these all have very generic names, part 3, part 4, etc. But you can see there's actually multiple instances of some of these. Like part 2 is actually all these 4 linkages at the top, or actually I think there's 6 of them in total. Those are all part of instances of the same component. So it was able to realize that when it was imported in, and because of that, it looks pretty good and group those nicely. So if we created a bill of materials, it would actually combine all those linkage parts together for me. Okay, so that looks okay. One way that we could visualize what I was referring to just now is actually if we go and jump into our tools here, we can go into inspection and actually do some color component cycling. This is a nice way to visualize your part, especially if the colors really haven't been applied yet. You can actually see that it's made all those linkages that I was referring to, the 6 different linkages with the same color. That is because they are the same component, just reused. So nice way to visualize that. And that looks all right. I'll keep it on for now as we go and we go on to some next steps here. So the other thing that's kind of annoying about this, and this was being demonstrated as I was animating through the motion links, is it'll do weird things like what you're seeing right now. It'll actually pass through different components, and it'll flip about sometimes in undesirable ways, let's just say. And there's actually some really easy ways of dealing with this, and probably the easiest way of dealing with this is actually just to add contact. This is kind of a cheater way of doing this, but I'm going to show you anyway. And to turn on contact, I'm going to just start typing into my design shortcuts, because honestly, I don't know where it is at this moment with this new UI. So another reason why this is so helpful. So if you're going to use contact to kind of limit the motion of an assembly like this, first thing you need to do is enable contact sets. So I'm going to enable contact sets. That creates a new folder essentially within my browser here. If I right click on that, I can create new contact sets, and I could do also an enable all contact, but because of the issues that we were seeing with that small gear and the big gear interfering with one another, that's not something that I would imagine would do me a lot of good, to be totally honest. In addition, when you do the enable all contacts, it actually puts a pretty big strain on your hardware, because it's kind of calculating and trying to figure out when those interferences happen. So it actually can do some undesirable things to your computer. So I don't recommend enable all contact. In this case, let's just do a new contact set, and we'll just select these 2 pieces here, and that'll enable me to help you see that with that on, it'll actually enable me to kind of clinch those together until they are touching. It does slow down there at the end. The first couple times I tried to drag it, it didn't really enable me to do the full range of motion, and that's something that you can understand is related to the calculations taking place to actually sense essentially that contact. So that's all right. We've dealt with the overextension on the top there, but at the bottom here, it should actually stop right around there. And visually, I'm just looking at what components really are going to interfere first, and it looks like these linkages with the gears below, the green and the light blue gears that you see there. So in this case, we'll create a new contact set. I'll just right click on my contact set folder, and we'll just do one of these, so this guy to this guy, and that's going to enable me to actually go through there and get that full range of motion. So like I say, this isn't the only way that you can do this. You can actually do this with like joint limits, which are really easy to do. Part of the reason why I was doing this is to figure out these values, and you'll see that the joints are telling me what these values are. So it looks like it goes from like negative 76 degrees to 34 degrees. So if I instead wanted to do this with a joint limit, I could just right click on any one of these joints. I mean, really each one should work. I can right click on this one here, and I'll say edit joint limits, and we'll set a min and a max, and min will be negative 76, I believe, and positive will be 34. And this can get a little wonky sometimes. Let me see if I disable my contacts temporarily, if I actually did that right. Looks like I did. Oh, no, I did not. So what I was saying is some of these joint limits, if they're, the numbers here don't really make sense to me at sometimes. It's likely because it's been flipped or something like that. So you can come through here and you can actually flip that, and we could try this again. We could say, negative 76 and 34. It's just because the orientation might have been a little bit off. Let's see if I actually, nope, I messed up again. You know what? Just use contact. Contact's so much easier. It does add some computational time, but we're all right with that. Anyway, I think that just about does it for this guy. We're trying to keep these live streams a little bit shorter at this time. We're still kind of working out the technical aspects related to streaming and the software behind it. I think I might continue with this assembly in the next installment of these live streams. I think we're going to try to do this, one a week right now, between me and Bryce, and I think we're going to start involving other people as well that have other, technical skills that maybe, go beyond what we know about CAM, or maybe what we might know about simulation or rendering or things like that. So we're going to try to, use our full breadth of Autodesk skills to highlight, all kinds of different functionality to you with these live streams. What I might do with this the next time is I might actually do a simulation, do a shape optimization on maybe one of the arms. Maybe I'll use a different assembly altogether. I get tired of looking at the same thing after I've practiced with it a couple times. And the reason for that is I got a lot of comments about wanting to see, using mesh and converting meshes into solids. And I think, by doing a shape optimization, getting the mesh out of that, and then going and turning that into a solid at that point would be a pretty valuable lesson to show you guys. So if that sounds good, let me know. I want to thank everybody for attending today's live stream. It really means a lot to us to have you guys out here and getting your feedback, and I hope Bryce has done a good job of answering any questions that you might have. If you like this, give it a thumbs up. We will put the recording up as soon as it's ready on YouTube's end, and if you liked it as well, please subscribe. If you're not subscribed right now, we always appreciate anyone who wants to listen to us. So thanks everyone. Have a great day, and thanks again for attending.